Good night and to all our viewers. We know thus far is that those that ambassadors of the 28 nations that make up the European Union have been discussing this arms embargo against Venezuela, and they're expected to sign next Monday. This embargo entails the prevention, will prevent anyone from selling and exporting weapons, arms to Venezuela, which they say can be used in repression. It's interesting that they use the word repression because this word was used often by the opposition back in those protests between April and July when the Bolivarian National Guard would prevent violent opposition protesters from approaching pro-government supporters or approaching private and public property, because when that happened, fights will entail, peaceful people would be damaged, hurt, and buildings would be damaged as well. And so the European Union is looking at this from a particularly opposition perspective, and so they expect to sign this next week. What they're also looking at, possibly, they've been creating a legal basis to create a travel ban and an asset freeze against certain high-ranking members of the Maduro administration. This will not go into play next week, but they're creating the legal base where it possibly can be used in the future. Also, they're also looking to create a ban against the export of surveillance equipment to Venezuela, which they say can be used in the surveillance of opposition leaders and members that the government has been keeping their eye on. Here in Venezuela, we haven't yet heard anything per se, interestingly enough, publicly by the government. Right now, as we speak, President Nicolas Maduro is addressing admirals and generals of his Bolivarian National Guard, and they've been looking really at what they've been looking at past today, the law against hate and discrimination. Also, this is what has been the topic by the President of the National Constituent Assembly, Delcy Rodriguez. So we're still looking out for responses from the government to see exactly how they will approach this new wave of sanctions, you can call it, because they've just been sanctioned by Canada and the United States. Sonny.
Thank you so much for that update. So that's our Reagan Devine in our Caracas headquarters. Military exercises are continuing in Brazil's Amazon region with the support of the United States. The operation, known as Amazon Log 2017, was defined as humanitarian, but some groups in Brazil and internationally have questioned that. Military forces from Peru, Colombia, the US and Brazil make up the Amazon Log 2017, and the supposed objective is to train troops to face possible humanitarian crises caused by natural disasters or the increasing number of refugees. Some have claimed that the true objective is a show of force towards Venezuela, but Brazil's army commanders insist it has nothing to do with the situation in Venezuela.
The United States has been working in cooperation with Colombia for many years. There is no justification in using Amazon Log to get closer to Venezuela. Colombia has been closer to that country for years now.
We are in the Amazon only because the Brazilian army invited us here. If they would have invited us to the south of the country, to Porto Alegre or any other place, we would have been there too.
Our correspondent, Adriana Rebreño, has more details.
I am here in Tabatinga, Brazil, where the Amazon Log 2017 military exercises are continuing. One of the main actions of the operation in the last 2 days has been the installation of a field hospital, and also members of the team have been carrying out some tasks in the local military hospital, which serves the population of this border area between Brazil, Colombia and Peru. I must say, this area is very inaccessible. The only way in is by plane or by ship. Also, there are almost no communications in the area. There is no access to internet or phones. This is a city that still needs a lot of help to continue to develop. On the other hand, the most controversial fact about this operation has been the participation of the U.S. In a recent press conference, the Army General Guillermo Teófilo said there was a conspiracy theory around this subject because according to him, the U.S. officials are here just to help, since they have a lot of experience in delivering aid during disaster situations. There are 30 members of the Southern Command, the National Guard, and the Forestry Guard of the U.S., who are here providing logistical help. There is also a U.S. Hercules 130 plane. We previously received information about them bringing a kitchen and a water purification plant, but this never happened in the end. The Brazilian Army Logistical Command is the organizer of the whole event, and they have remarked several times that the focus of the operation is on humanitarian aid. They keep saying that theories about the operation being related to the Venezuelan border are paranoia and unfounded. They also said this kind of military exercise could be repeated in different parts of Brazil and Latin America. We will continue to bring you details of this operation that will continue until November 13. Now back to you in the studio, Eugenie.
Adriana Robreño with that report, and more news in a minute, so stay with us. Both the United Nations Human Rights Body and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights have expressed concern after a new report in Honduras says senior public officials and executives of an energy company were behind the murder of the indigenous leader and environmental activist Berta Caceres. The two human rights bodies issued a joint statement criticizing the lack of transparency in the official investigation. They call on the Honduran government to comply with its obligation to ensure that attacks against human rights defenders are promptly, exhaustively, independently, and impartially investigated. We are now joined by Silvio Carillo, a nephew of Berta Caceres, who is campaigning for justice for her. He joins us now from San Francisco. So, Silvio, how do you think the international condemnation of the handling of the investigation of your aunt's murder be received by the Honduran government?
Well, I think they're doing their best to try to ignore it. They want no part of it. They're not. The government itself isn't commenting at all so far, we get repeated statements from the energy company DESA. That they say that these are, they have the 8 masterminds and that there's no more to this, that the case is, even though it's open, it's closed as far as they're concerned. But of course, that's not the truth. As you see here in this report is very clear, very simple detective work, investigative work. They don't really have to lift many fingers to find out who's really at fault. They're just not willing to do it. There's no political will to do this.
And Silvio, impunity is a serious problem in Honduras. Crimes can often go unpunished, especially when activists are killed. What more is the family planning to do to get justice for Berta Caceres, and how are you all finding the strength to persevere in your fight to get justice for your aunt?
Well, that's just it. This isn't about us. This is about her and the work she did and her legacy. This isn't about us. We're doing this for the people of Honduras, for the indigenous people of Honduras, and for indigenous people around the world. This is what Berta was doing. She was creating a solidarity network with indigenous people. So it's not just happening in Honduras. It's not just happening in Brazil, Peru, Africa, the U.S., where we have indigenous people being violated as well. This is about all of us, and that's our work is never going to be done. My son knows about Berta, and this isn't the end. If they think that this ended with her death, obviously they're mistaken, because we're going to continue this fight. So that's what drives us. And as far as the international pressure, That's the only thing we have. Because obviously the Honduran authorities, the Honduran government, Juan Orlando Hernandez's government is not willing to find justice. And so we are pressuring the U.S. government to help us with finding justice. And the U.S. government, frankly, should be doing a lot more. The former ambassador to the U.S., James Nealon, has been very poor on this situation, and he really didn't pay any attention to what the family was asking or saying. And now we've proved him wrong. And so, the U.S. needs to step up. We've been lobbying Congress, and there's a bill in Congress, H.R. 1299, the Berta Caceres Human Rights in Honduras Act. And we've got some 70 signers so far, co-signers, and we will get more, and we will pressure Honduras.
Thank you so much for chatting with us. We were talking to Silvio Carillo. He is the nephew of Berta Caceres, about the family's fight to get justice for the indigenous activists. Staying in Honduras, thousands took to the streets demanding that the current president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, be banned from standing for re-election, arguing that it is a constitutional violation. They also asked for transparency in the upcoming elections on November 26th.
They arrived from different places from all around the country, and they were led by the social organization Convergencia Ciudadana and the Opposition Alliance.
I came here because I have dignity, and I want people in this country to have better opportunities.
Look at what the government has given us. 950 extractive companies, destroying all of our lands, rivers, and forests. That's why Orlando has to leave.
The protesters marched to the electoral court where legal appeals have been presented against the re-election.
We've decided to march because of what the Honduran people are currently suffering. We found out that we needed to express ourselves, but we are also marching to take legal actions before court.
The destabilizing element is Juan Orlando Hernandez and bureaucracy, because the people of Honduras are showing their concerns through peaceful protest, but it's also their right to protest.
The electoral court system and its lack of credibility has already been denounced by different sectors.
At the moment we have absolute confidence with the results. Everything after the elections will be better. So this is affirmation that we're going to be able to count the ballots ourselves.
The presidential candidate for the Alliance Party, Salvador Nasralla, said that he won't accept the electoral results if the court doesn't use an alternate counting method.
First of all, I don't agree with, under no circumstances, the voting or counting system. I can't accept it. In 2013, we found out via a probe that the system was totally corrupt.
Members of the Alliance Party said that they're working to register thousands of people in order to be able to verify the results on election day. Leaders of Opposition Alliance made clear to the court authorities that they will install a computer center, and also that until they have their own count of votes, only then will they accept an eventual victory or defeat.
The United States government is tightening the controversial economic, financial, and commercial blockade against Cuba. The Treasury Department says the new restrictions will become effective on November 9th. The measures include further restrictions on travel to Cuba and on conducting business with a number of companies on the island. According to the Treasury Department, these changes are needed to block any economic activities that will help finance the military, intelligence, and security services in Cuba. And after almost 2 weeks of a national strike, indigenous communities in Colombia have reached an agreement with the government, which they hope will mean their demands are met. We have this report.
After 12 months of protest, the campesinos and the national government reached an agreement to end their peaceful protest. Among the agreements is a promise by both sides to sit down and talk by the end of the month, especially about the issue of illicit crops.
The government confirmed its commitment to comply with this agreement and not to use police force. This was an agreement we already had with the government after the national campesino strike of 2013.
The campesinos hope this time the government meets their demands, although experts say that the protest that the country saw in recent days is an evidence that the government won't comply with this community's demands.
This confirms that we are facing a state that historically has broken its agreements with the campesinos. We see the same regarding the peace agreement. The rural communities have to resort to protest to be heard.
In the meantime, the indigenous Minga continues after 8 days and more than 40 people injured by the state's violent repression. The government accepted a dialogue with the native people. Oscar Montero, from the Cancuamo community, thinks they are now looking for guarantees from the government as they hope the repression ends.
The state has always used disproportionate force with our communities, as if we were at war, as if indigenous people in Colombia were an armed group.
Social movement leaders have said that if the government continues to break the agreements they have with the campesinos, the peace process will be impossible in their territories.
At least 6 people are missing and 13 houses were destroyed after the Paila River burst its banks in southeast Colombia. A state of emergency has been declared in the north of the Cauca province. The sudden overflow of the river affected the urban area of the town of Corinto. Officials are worried that the flooding could reach neighboring municipalities. The Red Cross says the event left around 30 people injured and at least 60 families affected. And campesinos in Guatemala have begun an indefinite protest outside the Constitutional Court to demand the permanent closure of a mine on their land. Our reporter, Mario Rosales, has more from outside the court in Guatemala City.
We are outside the Constitutional Court here in Guatemala's capital, where an indigenous and farmers' march has come all the way from the north of the country. They're demanding that hydroelectric companies cease operations in their territories. They're asking court officials to revoke those licenses. They're also combining with protests from other indigenous and farmer groups that right now are gathering in at least 11 roads to demand that President Jimmy Morales resign, as the public ministry suggests he may have committed illicit acts. They're asking that Morales step down from the presidency and also that hydroelectric companies no longer operate in the region because they're taking up all the water from their rivers.
And corruption charges against Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glass have been presented by the Attorney General for alleged ties to the Odebrecht bribery scheme. Carlos Baca will now ask Judge Miguel Jurado to take Glass to trial as part of his alleged involvement in a corruption scheme with the Brazilian construction company. The ruling has also been brought against Glass's uncle, Ricardo Riviera, and 11 other suspects. Indigenous communities in Mexico are fighting several mining projects that are taking over their territory, affecting their health, and destroying their resources. The people of Teotihuacan Valley say that the material extracted from the area is being used to build the new Mexico City airport. Communities are asking authorities to respect their rights and help maintain their income.
We can't forget that these mining projects that define the economic and social politics of this government are responsible for the abuses of the indigenous communities' rights. These communities have defended their land, their territory, and for that they have been criminalized by the state.
Bolivarians are celebrating the festival of Las Nastitas, carrying elaborated decorated skulls to cemeteries in La Paz as part of an annual Aymara tradition. During the event that predates Spanish colonialism and combines both indigenous and Catholic traditions, the skulls don sunglasses, hats, and sometimes lit cigarettes as they're carried in elaborate boxes decorated with coca leaves and sweets. On arrival to the church, they're sprinkled with holy water. It is believed that the skulls protect the devotees' families and homes, regardless of whether they knew the person before they died or not. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. A pro-independence strike has been taking place in Catalonia in protest against the jailing of Catalan leaders. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered in the Sant Jaume Square to demand the release of 8 ministers of the deposed Catalan government, as well as other activists. But the protesters shut down roads and public transport was running a minimal service. Many shops were also closed.
We are striking for democracy in a government because ours has been kidnapped. Our government is in exile and in prison.
Our correspondent, Joan Ortiz, has an update from Barcelona.
At noon, there was a gathering in all the squares inside Catalonia. Then at 6 in the afternoon, again, another gathering was announced, and here it is. These are the people who have gathered in Barcelona, not at the square, but at the Cathedral's plaza. What's happening here right now is happening all across the region, gatherings in all locations. In any case, this is a protest that got quite an attendance. It was announced by small organizations, but it has become a strike by the defense committees of the referendum, who are carrying out several non-violent acts throughout the territory, such as blocking some very important roads, effectively cutting off the connection with the rest of Spain and France. You can see what people are demanding here right now: freedom for the political prisoners. We've also seen how streets in Barcelona were closed down and how the traffic was moving slowly. It's all been done by the defense committees of the referendum and the Republic. In Madrid, they see it as something completely different, the exact opposite to what is being perceived here. They say that attendance to these gatherings are poor. However, as you can see, the number of people on occasions like this is huge. People on the streets ratifying and demanding that the political prisoners be freed. The biggest news today, although it's not unexpected, is that the Constitutional Tribunal invalidated Catalonia's independence declaration, which was celebrated this past October 27th.
Joan Ortiz in Barcelona. International aid remains essential for the survival of thousands of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, more than 3 years after Israel's Protective Shield military offensive. Our correspondent, Noor Harazin, has this report.
Hundreds of business owners in the Gaza Strip held protests on Tuesday over delays in compensations payments for damages done to their projects during the last Israeli war on Gaza in 2014. Gaza Chamber of Commerce member Rifat Naim urged Palestinian President Mr. Mahmoud Abbas to order immediate relief payments for affected Palestinians.
About 6,800 trade facilities were destroyed during the Israeli war on Gaza in 2014. 5,500 of them belong to the trade sector. These protesters are calling for the right to be compensated for the damage done to their projects, which is estimated at nearly $67 million. None of these protesters has received any compensation payments. These people are hiring more than 20,000 workers. We call on President Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian government to compensate these people immediately.
About $5.4 million were pledged by international donors in Cairo for the reconstruction of Gaza Strip in October 2014. However, the amount of funding received actually fell far short of the amount pledged, according to reports by the World Bank. More than 2,000 Palestinians were killed, the overwhelming majority of whom were civilians, during the last Israeli offensive on the coastal territory. Economists say Gaza's economy will take years to recover from the impacts of the devastating war, which left behind some 171,000 homes, 360 factories, as well as thousands of hectares of farmland in ruins by tanks, shelling and airstrikes. Noor Harazin, Trisu TV, Gaza.
U.S. President Donald Trump is in China, the third stop on his 5-nation tour of Asia. He's been to meet his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. Our correspondent, Isiara Diaz, has more.
The United States President Donald Trump is in China on his first visit to the nation, where he will meet with Xi Jinping as part of his Southeast Asian tour. The most important meetings will take place during the Business Forum and at the Great Hall of the People, where they will sign a number of bilateral agreements. Donald Trump is visiting China as part of his Asian tour that also took him to Japan and South Korea. China and the US are looking to move closer, particularly after Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Florida last April. The US President has two main priorities in his visit to the Asian giant. First, to put a stop to the North Korean nuclear program, which he underlined during his recent visits prior to China. While in Beijing, Trump will hope to encourage the Chinese government to increase pressure on Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear program. Another of Trump's objectives during this visit is to touch base on their commercial and economic relationship, where they have differing approaches. The US supports protectionism and China is pro-economic globalization, although both presidents have said that they are optimistic that this visit will strengthen their bond, particularly in the commercial sector.
Isira Diaz. It's also 1 year exactly since Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. So what's the balance sheet? I asked our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jorge Gestoso.
1 year today, after Donald Trump has been elected, he has reached the lowest level of approval according to many polls, which means that it's a fantastic opportunity for Democrats to win some terrain, and also a big question mark or a big concern for the establishment of the political Republican Party, because doesn't know if they should continue to bet on Donald Trump or it's time to start to distance themselves and try another route.
And we've come to the end of this evening's news brief. So for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sweeney Gray. Thank you so much for watching.